Well, good morning. I'm just so pleased and honored to have a good friend of mine today, Pasquale Russo, and I could explain our background, but perhaps we could start, Pasquale, by introducing yourself and telling the audience here how we met.
Well, my name is Pasquale Russo. We met at a Barnabas group meeting originally, and then over the years, kind of just said hello to one another. And then common friends mentioned each other's names, and then providentially, and we'll talk more about that. I believe we then decided to have a coffee together once a month.
So maybe we could kind of go back to where it all began for Pasquale Russo. Can you describe where were you born and raised and
Yes,
kind of give a
yes.
summary where we are today then?
Yeah, real bullet point wise. Born and raised in Naples, Italy. Um, my brother and I, mom and dad emigrated here in 1973. My dad left everything behind, which wasn't much. It was a restaurant owned by family, and decided to sacrifice everything to give us a better future in life. And things weren't going well economically in Naples. Politically, they weren't going well at all. And then where we were in the center of town, there was also a little bit of mafia going on, and so it was time to leave. And fortunately, my mother had a brother here who sponsored us. And 3 years later, we got the call to be able to come out, legally here. And my dad worked unskilled labor, waiter. A lot of Italians do waitering and food service, and worked at a deli for years until he got cancer, and then shortly after passed away at the age of 64. And as I approach that age, I ponder that, what he must have been thinking and going through. But so grateful, like many immigrants, for the sacrifice that we were able to stand on their shoulders and be able to move, I guess you could say, upwards from there. And that doesn't necessarily mean just economically, but also a way of living and so forth. So fast forward to today, I'm 60 years old. I have a lovely wife of 36 years, and we have three children, and then two boys and a daughter. And I have a business, a small business that produces hair care products, and we use that as our platform to be able to then use funds to help further kingdom opportunities. And so we're very much involved in ministry and different variety of ways. And very grateful to that, because it's our outflow of being grateful to the Lord choosing us and calling us to Himself, um, forgiving our sin, and then being able to move forward to help others because we have been given so much.
That's such a great testimony of moving from Sicily, from Naples.
Hmm.
You were 6 years old at the time?
I was 9 years old. My brother was 11.
9 years old. So were you speaking English then, or did you have to learn English?
I had to learn English. Um, Knew only very, very few words. And when I landed here, it was already school. It was March, and so we got into a school, and the teacher gave me a friend to show me around. Um, and he was from Argentina, so he used his Spanish to help me understand what he was saying. And so I
Mm.
ended up learning Spanish and English at the same time.
9 years old.
Uh,
Where were you living then?
Southgate, California.
Wow.
Yeah, that's where my uncle was that sponsored us. So we lived in the back of his house for 6 months in a shed converted into one room with a bunk bed for my brother and I and a full-size bed for my mom and dad. So we were cramped into 12 by 14 um, feet quarters, and we had a porta potty. And then during the daytime, we'd be able to go inside the house and live amongst the family. But at night, we had to sleep out in the only bedroom that they had created for us.
Well, talk about that, your earliest memories as a 9-year-old with a 11-year-old brother, going to school for the first time and meeting your Argentinian friend. What was that like in
Uh, fear
California?
and fear and trepidation. Everything was so much bigger, and everybody seemed to be um, different than I. But what happens is when you make a friend, and you're able to walk with one friend, it gives you courage, it gives you strength. And that's true today in our walk with the Lord. It's good to have a friend that you could do life with.
So then, as you went through the early grades and then in high school, what was like life like then at in the high school years?
Yes. Well, thanks for asking. I think, as you know, everybody wants to fit in, and I didn't fit in because my mom would give me these submarine sandwiches for lunch, and everybody else had white Wonder bread with peanut butter and jelly. And so I was a little chubby early on, but then I got, I grew, um, began to play sports, got accepted in society because I was wearing the right shoes and the right clothing, and I wanted to make sure I didn't stand out. I wanted to be like everybody that was popular, but so your identity becomes one of being a follower and not a leader,
Hmm.
um, and so in high school I think I was confident, became more of a leader. I was involved in leadership uh, clubs, and so that kind of built my confidence going into college, and then getting a job going to college, and so I was doing pretty well.
What was your friend group like in high school and in college? Were they what
Mm.
how would you describe them?
Yeah, in college it was a melting pot of all sorts, even African American, Mexican, and of course white, Caucasian, Asian. But earlier on, when I first came to America, I remember seeing at recess all these lunch benches. And I looked around and I didn't know where I'd fit in because there was the surf kids, there was the Mexican kids, and there was the black kids. And as you have your cafeteria tray, you look around and I didn't know where to sit. And fortunately, my Argentinian friend brought me into his group. So that's the early memory. Later on, I was more again confident that I can integrate groups, and I felt very empowered that way to be able to enter a group and break the ice, I guess you could say.
Where did you go to college then,
I
Pasquale?
went I went to Cal State Long Beach. It was local. Had to work to pay for it, so it was work during the day. Sorry, going to school during the day, work afternoon and evenings. I was fortunate to have a flexible schedule to work late nights. So I was an average student. Didn't do very well in college because I was busy and I was also distracted. But that's where I went and did graduate. I think it took me 5 years to graduate, and but that led me to a career that then, as you know, life takes you to a different career. I was in retail, and then I went to manufacturing of hair care products behind the scenes until later I had my own business in the early 2000s.
So was your area of study business or what did you study?
Business management. It was what everybody was going into, business management. So that was my major, a
So
BS,
as an
Bachelor of
entrepreneur
Science.
as an entrepreneur, did you have early insights that you were entrepreneurial as opposed to working for somebody?
That's a great question. We early on, my dad instilled in me that you work loyally for a company and you work hard and then you retire and you get your pension. So that was my plan. I was working for a large retail chain and I did not have plans to become an entrepreneur. What happened is I received a job opportunity to move to Manitowoc, Minnesota to run an operation um, that was going to move to Carlsbad. So I was very happy to do that because we loved Carlsbad area. To move from the Los Angeles County and live in San Diego County was a dream always. So we made that move, and in the transition, the owner of the company slash CEO said, "We have some bad news. We are not going to move our offices after all to uh, manufacturing to Carlsbad, California. We're going to leave our manufacturing. We're only going to move marketing offices to Carlsbad. So, would you like to move your family to Manitowoc, Minnesota?" I said no. Well, how about flying back and forth? And I said, no, that's not conducive to a family. Uh, so they gave me an exit, and that what drove me to become an entrepreneur and start my own business.
That's providential, it sounds like.
Sounds like it. Looking in hindsight, don't think I would have taken a leap of faith. What ends up happening is when you're desperate, your back's up against the wall, you you don't know where to go. And my wife encouraged me basically when I came and said we don't have a job, and she said that's okay. And then, what do you mean that's okay? We're going to lose our house. We barely moved in here, and we're not going to be able to sell it without losing the fees of the real estate agent, and that's okay. Well, we'll have to move into an apartment. She says, well, that's okay. And so when you go down that road and you know you have a friend partner that's willing to believe, um, that's the beginning where you can only go north from there. And shortly after, I had another friend who says, why don't you just hang your hat in my business? We'll split the profits 50-50. I think you could become a great salesperson. You could be your own boss. We'll take care of the back end. We'll just split the profits. And he gave me a draw so that I would have some income every month. And over some time, that draw went away because of, again, providence. The Lord brought an account that was able to pay off all of my draw back draw and be able to be on full commission. And that providence was a company that happened to be run by a childhood friend of ours because her parents and my parents were friends in the old
Mm.
country in Naples, Italy.
Mm.
And we did not know that we both were in the same hair care industry. And so when we introduced each other, she said, is your mom and dad Alfredo and Maria? And I said, what? How do you know my mom and dad? Because well, my mom, because I knew her by her maiden name, not her married name. And so she told me her maiden name, and I said, "Oh my gosh!" And so we hadn't seen each other since we were children, and and that's how God provided.
That is amazing. So during this time then, Pasquale, how many children did you have? What was your family like at the time?
Yeah, at the time we had my daughter and then David, which you met, young little boy. So just and then we 3 years later we had Derek. So Derek is our youngest, and he lives in Indiana. Our daughter Marie lives in LA, and David lives here, currently here in Encinitas or San Marcos.
So from the standpoint of then being an entrepreneur, what was your internal dialogue at the time when you're an entrepreneur and you're not looking to somebody else to write the check? You're responsible for it. What was that
Yes.
feeling like at the time?
Yeah, again, at the time it was 50-50, so you feel like you had a partner to lean on. But in 2010, uh, through a turn of events, I went on my own, and that's when it's a leap of faith. And as you know, 2009, 2008, those are not times that you want to start anything. And so they thought I was crazy, but both Danelle and I felt a strong confirmation from the Lord that said, go now and be able to start our own business. And by the grace of God, a few clients called me and said, hey, where are you? Because we called the office and you're not there anymore. And I said, well, I'm glad you called me because my attorneys said not to call you. And so they called seeking my help. And so that's when we started growing on our own and built a warehouse and had distribution for these hair care lines that we were manufacturing.
One of the things about you, Pasquale, and your reputation is not only your humility, but your generosity. Where did that come from? Where did your generosity come from? Because as you mentioned, 2008, 2009 were tough times in the economy. And yet I know that you are involved in various ministries, supporting various ministries. Where did that philosophy start from or come from?
I think it came from number one, the word of God, but mostly in my experience, where I felt so um, humbled. You said the word humble, but I was humbled by the fact that Jesus Christ had died for my sin. When I finally captured and understood what that meant, and I'm still learning what that means, um, I felt an appreciation for what we call the second chance, which you know that God gives you lots of chances. And I wanted to give back. My Catholic upbringing also, have to say, was all about works versus faith, where you kind of do good things, do good deeds to try to balance the scale of your sin. At least that's how I saw it at the time, where you do good works. And so that was built in me. But as when you become a Christian, when I became a Christian, I started realizing that it was supposed to be an outflow of appreciation and gratitude for what he had done for me. So the outflow would be a byproduct of my gratitude for what he had done, would be to seek out, the lost and help the less fortunate and see where God would use me in different areas.
So what season of life now in terms of where you've been called are you in right now?
As you know, we don't know how long we're given on this earth. And so I do have a sense of urgency, where we pray that the Lord would teach us to number our days, and we know that time is the only thing that is not replaceable, but we have eternity to look forward to. So I'm pushing the gas pedal a little bit more when it comes to kingdom building. Um, you may have heard this phrase, do your giving while you're living, so you're knowing where it's going. Um, and I forgot who said that, to be honest, but you guys can look it up. And I think about that in the moment. If the Lord is calling us to do something, we don't want to procrastinate. We want to be able to be part of what He's doing. And so He uses us in that regard, and He uses all of us in various ways, whether it be intercessory prayer or befriend somebody that maybe is an outcast, or enable to fund or yeah, seed a project, or just come alongside somebody who's anointed by the Lord and you're seeing and you want to fan the flames. And so you come alongside and you help them that way.
Our friend, and I've said this before about our mutual friend Mario. de Matteo,
Yes.
um, who told me of the saying, "Blessed are those that plant seeds for trees under whose shade they'll never sit."
Mm,
And it strikes me as much of what you're doing falls within that characteristic and that mantra. And in a way, what we're doing here today is kind of a time capsule to give insight into who Pasquale Russo is, not only in terms of that handsome face and the generosity that you've shown, but also to talk about what your motivations are, what your philosophies are, what your interests are.
mm.
And you mentioned a sense of urgency. Uh, are there other areas that you see in the immediate future that you'd like to perhaps focus on?
Hmm. I've never created a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan. So I don't look that far ahead. But having said that, I know that my wife and I really want to instill uh, a presence of the Lord in our grandchildren. We know that our children have heard the gospel, know where we stand. Some are walking with the Lord, and some may not be yet. But we now feel a responsibility to be an example for our grandchildren. And so we're spending time with our grandchildren to do that in our example. And even though they're far apart, we're blessed to be able to travel. That's a sense of urgency, I guess you could say. But the other is to kind of be obedient and be watchful where God is at work and then join Him. And sometimes we can get very comfortable, especially when we get older. We start, nothing wrong with playing golf, nothing wrong with watching a football game, nothing wrong with watching, shows at night or whatever. But the Lord, if the Lord puts something on your heart, I think it's important to respond to it in some way. Um, and the other thing is to just keep drawing closer to the Lord. Because as my friend said, when you become before you're a Christian, you're an idiot. When you become a Christian, you're less of an idiot, but you're still growing, you're still learning, and so you make a lot of mistakes throughout life. Some you're certainly aware of, and some you kind of justify because you're saying to yourself, "Well, I'm giving 99% of my surrender to the Lord, but maybe I'm holding on to 1%." And that 1% can ruin the other 99 because you're not walking with the Lord or you're living in some kind of sin. And so I think the Lord continues to pursue you, even when you sense maturity, you sense growth. There's still some other area that the Lord will put his finger on that says this too needs to go. This too needs to be surrendered. And so in the meantime, you affect other people around you. And so my pastor said um, in a group, he said when you're by yourself, let's say you're a bachelor, you have your will. When you get married, you have two wills contrasting one another. When you have a child, you got another will to contend with. And when you have two children, and so on. So now you have all these wills battling for one another. And so I guess, we have to compromise, surrender self, become selfless. And that's hard to do when I have my agenda and I want to do something. But you have to take into account what other people want to do too.
So when you think about those words of wisdom and you think about your three children, as a father myself, I certainly appreciate and am grateful for the relationship I have with my two boys and your three children. Are there words that you have spoken with them as they were children? Or another way of asking it is, how do you feel your influence was when they were younger? And what would you say to them in terms of what seeds you planted with them when they first entered this world?
That's a great question. I know I did a few things right. One of the things that I remember doing when the children were small was to apologize to them. I wanted them to know that dad makes mistakes and dad's not always right. And so if I prematurely yelled at them or um, didn't quite hear them out and abruptly stopped them, or whatever it was that what I did that was wrong. Um, I remember apologizing and asking for forgiveness to a 4-year-old, David, you know, and um, and it was kind of wonderful for them to say, "Wow, yes, and to give me forgiveness." So I think that's important to let them know you're not perfect early on, and looking to the one who is perfect. The other thing I think I did right was trying to point the finger to the Lord. And I would say, if you're pleasing God, you're pleasing me, because I can't be everywhere um, and see your good things and your mistakes. But God sees all things. And so basically, I learned along the way that those words are for me as well, And so those things I would say I did okay, but I made a lot of mistakes, and I always share with them that I always pray to the Lord that He has filled in the gaps through His grace and His mercy, and I've had those frank heart to heart conversations with them, and we seem to be understood, with one another.
Sometimes our words themselves are are heard, of course. At the same time, our behavior and how we treat other people can speak volumes in the child's memory. Uh, how did you model for your children your behavior in how you treated their mother, your wife?
hmm hmm I think they saw a loving relationship with between my wife and I. Holding hands, kissing, hugging. There was also a lot of there's always a lot of affection, especially with an Italian who, in the southern Italy, you hug and you kiss, and it's very touchy feely. But one thing that, again, nothing against my dad or mom, um, the words "I love you" were never spoken
Mm.
because it just back in the day, you just didn't do that. A father to a son. I don't know why. Um, Before he died, he told me he loved me. That was huge. But I promised myself that I would always tell my kids I love them. And of course, now, as you know, you say it all the time. Oh, dad, of course. Oh, yeah. Early on, especially during teenage years, they didn't even want to hear it. But it's embedded in them that I love them. So the words I love you are very important and meaningful. Um, but, they also seen an ugly side of me, a mean side of me. And that's why it's important to go to the Lord and then apologize.
How did you handle the other parts of our personality, not necessarily our personality, but our behaviors when it came to confronting difficult parts of life like suffering,
hmm
the failure, and rejection in relationships?
Mm.
How do you believe you modeled uh, a reaction to those kinds of experiences?
Well, I think those are great questions. I think with the help of my wife and my Lord, um, I think we did okay. I'm sure I worried a lot. I was anxious a lot, especially during career changes. And I think they saw that, and I know that that's not very biblical, to worry, because that shows lack of trust and faith in the Lord. Um, but again, being true to yourself and then being honest about it and going to the Lord with it is very important. So I don't think I did very well, but I think the fact that suffering is a integral part of growth. I think without suffering, you don't have the greater growth in relationship with the Lord. Um, I think my highest growths have been during the toughest times of our lives. And so, I thank God for for suffering because he walks with you through it. He'll never leave you or forsake you. We may leave him, but he's always there ready to receive us with open arms. But sometimes we just don't believe, we don't trust, we don't hear him, we don't see him. And those desert moments are very important moments because that's when it's when it's you and your thoughts, and hopefully you have written the word of God on your heart for for you to recall it. If not, go to it and listen to it for you to be brought back into his presence. Because once you're in his presence, then fear goes away, doubt goes away, and the love of God, overcomes, and you're in a safe place again.
So as a parent, when you see your children dealing with these issues of suffering, of rejection, of
Yeah.
unfairness of life,
Yes.
how did, as a parent, as a father, did you relate to when your children went through these kinds of experiences?
Well, as I matured, I was thankful that they weren't hurt more than they were, because we want to stop limit the amount of pain that they go through because we're parents, we're dads. But think about what God had to go through to watch His Son go to the cross and die a horrible death, willingly on our behalf. He didn't do anything wrong, and yet here we are as parents. We want to prevent our children from falling uh, into trouble, into suffering, and yet God uses it for His good. So it's a tough, tough place, but it's also again a place of trust where you go to the Lord and trust Him with our children and our grandchildren. And so we have two grandchildren that have been diagnosed with a genetic mutation, and that has brought us closer to the Lord, as well, to pray for them. And thank God, lately they're in a good place, and they have great parents who work as a team, and so we're thankful for that.
What kind of words would you give those grandchildren as they navigate life? If you could look forward in their lifetime, uh, in the years ahead, what words would
Mm.
you want to have them be embedded in their heart?
Yes. I think the words "you are loved," "you are loved," and "you're not alone." Yeah. Um, and maybe most of it will be without words. Maybe most of it will be just through action that they see God's goodness.
Well, it sounds like you've certainly navigated at your young age. Uh,
Thank you for saying young age.
well, it's all relative since I'm a geezer here. So navigating the seasons of life is has its it's not a straight line. There's
Right.
ups and downs and
Yes. Yes.
sufferings and providential and perhaps um, uncomfortable and unpredictable things that happen in life. And some of the questions relate to, as you know, love. Uh, because love is a difficult word to define, and it relates to our philosophies of the secular world versus the biblical definition, as
Mhm.
in 1 Corinthians 13.
13. Yeah.
So when you think about love, is there anything that has been undone, has not been done yet, that is on your plate that you'd like to uh, point your focus to in the next few years?
That's a great question. I think, as my pastor says, we're leaky vessels and we tend to forget. And so I think repeating to my children and grandchildren, maybe the story, um, of where we've come from, humble beginnings, both my wife's side and my side, and then how God has brought us through, and always giving God the glory. I think repeating the story, as you know, the Israelites would do that, and they would then put stones of remembrance, and then they would share them with their children and grandchildren, and so that the story would not be forgotten of how God brought them through. And I think that's for all of us. We should never forget how God has brought us through, and He's at work, and He's going to finish what He started.
At the end of your life, Pasquale, how would you imagine you'll measure your life?
Yeah, not by things. I think by relationships, and yeah, I would leave that up to the Lord. But I'm thankful that He's yeah paved the way as well, so that we can enter into His arms and get to see Him face to face.
Well, listen, my friend, thank you for our conversation. Um, I think there are insights that you've provided of yourself and for your children and for future generations. So thank you very much. I know that you know that I've had a conversation with David. Uh, it might be interesting to perhaps have a joint conversation with yourself and David, but we'll see. And perhaps your other two children might be interested in sharing their perspective of
Hmm.
their fathers and mothers. But I guess we can leave that to another time. So
Mm.
thank you, my friend, for your time and your transparency and your vulnerability. You're a great brother in Christ, and I'm honored to have been able to spend this time with you.
Thank you for who you are, for your calming presence, and for loving so well, and great questions. I think Jesus asked great questions, and I think you are doing exactly what Jesus did. So thank you for that, because it helps all of us to heal, um, and to move forward and move on, to finish the race that God has started in us, in each of us. So a race well run so far, and you got some more to go until God is done with you. So keep running the race, Ron. God bless you.